In the cold depths of space, where countless civilizations have risen and fallen, one truth echoes through the void: never underestimate the species that calls themselves human. They are the ones who laugh in the face of death, who find humor in the darkest moments, and who will risk everything for a stranger they've known for mere hours. This is the story of Jake Morrison, a maintenance worker on a deep space mining station, whose life of routine repairs and casual jokes was about to collide with destiny. What started as another boring shift would become a legend whispered among the stars, the tale of how one human's stubborn refusal to abandon hope saved not just a broken alien girl, but potentially the future of galactic peace itself. Sometimes heroes aren't born from greatness. Sometimes they're forged in the moment when ordinary people decide that doing nothing is simply not an option. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the maintenance tunnel of Outpost Sigma 7, his toolkit clanging softly against the metal walls. The mining station orbited a dead planet in the Kepler system, far enough from civilized space that most people forgot it existed. That was fine by Jake. He preferred the quiet life of fixing broken things to the chaos of the inner worlds. The artificial gravity generator in Section C had been acting up again, causing workers to float randomly during their shifts. Jake had seen veteran miners suddenly find themselves stuck to the ceiling, cursing in languages from 12 different planets. It would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. One wrong move during a zero-G episode, and someone could end up crushed by mining equipment. As he reached the main generator housing, Jake heard something that made him pause. It was a sound he'd never heard before on the station, a soft, musical humming that seemed almost like crying. The nearest inhabited section was 3 levels up, and the sound was definitely coming from somewhere in the maintenance area. Jake followed the sound through a series of narrow passages until he reached an abandoned storage bay. The door was slightly ajar, and the humming was louder now. He pushed the door open slowly and peered inside. What he saw made him forget about gravity generators entirely. In the corner of the storage bay, huddled behind some old crates, was a girl who clearly wasn't human. Her skin had a pale blue tint that shimmered slightly in the dim light, and her ears were longer and more pointed than any human's. She was small, maybe 17 or 18 in human years, and her clothes were torn and dirty. Most striking were her eyes, large, silver orbs that seemed to hold depths of sadness Jake had never seen before. She looked up when she heard the door creak, and Jake saw terror flash across her face. She tried to scramble deeper into her hiding spot, but her left leg wouldn't support her weight. Jake noticed the makeshift bandage wrapped around her thigh, already soaked through with something that wasn't quite the right color to be human blood. Hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, holding up his hands to show he wasn't armed. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl stared at him for a long moment, her breathing rapid and shallow. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes, musical but fragile. "Please. I hide. They find me, they kill me." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. In his 15 years working various space stations, he'd seen refugees before. Usually they were just people trying to escape bad economic situations or minor legal troubles. But this girl's fear was different, primal and desperate. "Who's trying to kill you?" Jake asked, slowly moving closer. The girl flinched but didn't try to run again. "Vexi," she whispered, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard that name before. The Vexi were slavers and, worse, a nomadic fleet that raided isolated settlements throughout the Outer Rim. They were known for taking prisoners and selling them to the highest bidder, regardless of age or species. "How did you get here?" Jake asked, kneeling down several feet away from her. The girl's silver eyes filled with tears that looked like liquid mercury. "Ship, my ship. They attack. Kill everyone. I escape in pod, crash on planet below. Walk for days. Find way onto station." She gestured weakly at an air vent near the ceiling. "Very tired. Very hurt." Jake looked at the vent and shook his head in amazement. The girl must have climbed up from the planet's surface using the station's external maintenance ladders, then somehow made her way through the ventilation system. It was a journey that would have killed most people, human or otherwise. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Zara," she replied. "Zara Nixhal. I'm Jake. Jake Morrison." He smiled at her, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. Look, Zara, you can't stay here. This storage bay gets checked regularly, and if the Vexhai are looking for you. They are, Zara interrupted. They come to station. I hear them on calm channels. They tell station chief they track escaped slave. Offer reward. Jake's blood ran cold. If the Vexhai had contacted station chief Ramirez, then it was only a matter of time before they found her. Ramirez was a decent enough administrator, but he was also practical to a fault. If faced with a choice between harboring a fugitive and maintaining profitable relationships with various unsavory groups, Jake knew which way the chief would lean. Okay, we need to get you somewhere safer, Jake said, his mind racing. Can you walk? Zara tried to stand but immediately collapsed back down, biting her lip to keep from crying out. Leg very bad, she admitted. Jake moved closer and examined the wound as best he could without touching it. The bandage was crude but effective, and while there was significant bleeding, it didn't look like anything vital had been hit. Still, she needed proper medical attention. I'm going to help you up, Jake said. We'll take it slow. As gently as possible, Jake helped Zara to her feet. She was lighter than he expected, and when she leaned against him for support, he could smell something like cinnamon and starlight on her skin. It was completely alien but somehow comforting. They made their way slowly through the maintenance tunnels, Jake supporting most of Zara's weight. She was trying hard not to show how much pain she was in, but he could feel her trembling with each step. Where we go? Zara asked as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. My quarters, Jake replied. It's not much, but it's private. I can patch you up properly and figure out what to do next. Why you help me? Zara's question caught him off guard. You not know me. I bring danger. Jake paused, considering the question. Why was he helping her? The smart thing would be to report her to station security and let them handle it. But looking into those silver eyes, seeing the fear and pain there, he knew he couldn't do that. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Besides, everyone deserves a chance. They continued in silence for several minutes, winding their way through passages that Jake knew by heart. As they walked, he found himself thinking about Zara's situation. The Vexhai were dangerous, but they were also businesspeople in their own twisted way. They wouldn't risk a major confrontation with a mining station unless they were sure of their prize. Which meant Zara was more valuable than she appeared. Zara, he said as they approached his quarters, what did you do before the attack? What was your job on the ship? She was quiet for so long that Jake thought she hadn't heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I was, how you say, translator? But, not for words. For thoughts. For feelings between species. My people, we have gift. We help others understand each other without fighting. Jake felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. A telepathic translator would be incredibly valuable to anyone operating in multi-species space. Criminals, especially, would pay enormous sums for someone who could read the intentions of their enemies and victims. They reached Jake's quarters, and he quickly checked to make sure the corridor was empty before opening the door. His living space was small but comfortable, a bed, a desk, a small kitchenette, and a private bathroom. Luxury accommodations by mining station standards. Jake helped Zara to the bed, where she collapsed with a soft sigh of relief. Now, in better light, he could see that her injuries were worse than he'd initially thought. Besides the leg wound, she had cuts and bruises covering her arms, and there was a nasty gash on her forehead that had been bleeding into her unusual silver-white hair. I'm going to get some medical supplies, Jake said. Will you be okay for a few minutes? Zara nodded, though she was clearly exhausted. I not go anywhere, she said with a weak attempt at humor. Jake smiled and headed for his small bathroom, where he kept a well-stocked first aid kit. As he gathered supplies, he heard Zara's voice from the main room, so soft he could barely make out the words. Thank you, Jake Morrison. Thank you for not turning away. When he returned with bandages and antiseptic, he found Zara sitting up straighter, some color having returned to her cheeks. She watched with interest as he laid out the medical supplies. I'm not a doctor, Jake warned. But I've patched up plenty of mining accidents over the years. Is okay, Zara said. I trust you. Those 3 words hit Jake harder than he expected. Here was someone who had every reason to fear and distrust everyone she met, and yet she was willing to put her life in his hands based on nothing more than a few kind words and actions. As Jake carefully cleaned and rebandaged Zara's wounds, she told him more about the attack on her ship. Her people, the Etherians, were part of a peaceful trade confederation that specialized in diplomatic services. They traveled between worlds, helping to resolve conflicts and facilitate communication between species that might otherwise be unable to understand each other. We were returning from successful negotiation, Zara explained as Jake worked on her leg. 2 mining companies, they fight over asteroid field. We help them find compromise. Everyone happy. Sounds like important work, Jake said, carefully applying a fresh bandage. My grandmother, she say our gift comes with responsibility. We must use it to bring peace, not profit. Zara's voice grew sad. But, Vex High, they not care about peace. They see profit only. As Jake finished treating her wounds, he found himself growing more angry at the injustice of it all. Here was someone who dedicated her life to helping others, and she was being hunted by slavers who wanted to exploit her gifts for their own gain. How many of your people were on the ship? He asked quietly. 47, Zara whispered. Including my parents. All dead now. Jake felt his hands clench into fists. He'd never been much of a fighter, his talents lay in fixing things, not breaking them. But the idea of 47 peaceful people being murdered for profit made him want to find the Vex High responsible and show them what humans thought of slavery. Instead, he focused on the problem at hand. We need to figure out how to get you off this station safely, he said. The Vex High will search every inch of this place if they have to. Maybe I should surrender, Zara said suddenly. You say Station Chief talked to them? Maybe I go to him, ask for protection? No, Jake said more sharply than he intended. Zara looked startled, and he forced himself to calm down. I'm sorry. But Ramirez won't protect you. He can't afford to. The station depends on staying neutral with all the various groups that pass through here. Then, what we do? Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking through their options. The station had regular supply runs to and from the inner worlds, but all cargo and passenger manifests were closely monitored. The Vex High would certainly check those. There were also smugglers who operated out of the station, but most of them would sell Zara to the highest bidder without a second thought. I have an idea, he said finally. But it's going to be dangerous. Zara looked at him with those incredible silver eyes. More dangerous than staying here? Point taken. Jake sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to jar her injured leg. There's a freighter that docks here once a month. The captain is an old friend of mine, Marcus Chen. He's one of the few truly honest traders I know. Problem is, his next scheduled run isn't for 3 weeks. Vex High find me long before then, Zara said quietly. Not if I can help it, Jake replied. There are maintenance areas on this station that even the chief doesn't know about. Places I can hide you while we figure out how to contact Marcus early. You would do this? Risk your job, your safety, for stranger? Jake looked at her, taking in the obvious exhaustion and pain she was fighting, the courage it must have taken to survive everything she'd been through, and the simple trust she was showing in him. You're not a stranger anymore, he said. And, I told you, everyone deserves a chance. Just then, Jake's comm unit crackled to life. All personnel, report to your stations. We have an incoming ship requesting docking clearance. Standard security protocols are in effect. Jake and Zara looked at each other, and he saw his own fear reflected in her silver eyes. The Vex High had arrived. Jake's mind raced as the comm system announced the incoming ship. He moved quickly to his small workstation and pulled up the station's docking manifest on his personal terminal. Sure enough, there it was, a vessel called the Crimson Reaper requesting emergency docking clearance. The ship's registration showed it as a salvage vessel, but Jake knew better. That's them, he said quietly to Zara, who had gone very pale. The Vexhai don't advertise what they really are. Zara closed her eyes and seemed to be concentrating. After a moment, she opened them again, and Jake was surprised to see that her fear had been replaced by something else, determination. I can feel them, she whispered. 3 minds, very dark. Full of violence and greed. They think Station will hand me over easily. She paused, then added with the ghost of a smile, they underestimate humans. Can they sense you the way you sense them? Jake asked, already moving to gather supplies. Not unless I use my abilities actively. But if I try to read their thoughts or influence their emotions, they will know I am here. Zara attempted to stand again, and this time managed to stay upright with only a slight wince. We must go now. They will start searching immediately. Jake nodded and quickly threw some basic supplies into a maintenance bag, food rations, water, a portable power cell, and his more advanced repair tools. If they were going into the deep maintenance areas, they'd need equipment to survive. Can you walk? He asked. I will walk, Zara replied firmly. Lead the way. They left Jake's quarters and immediately headed for a service corridor that ran parallel to the main thoroughfares. Jake had chosen this route specifically because it would keep them away from the areas where the Vexhai would likely begin their search. As they walked, he couldn't help but notice how quiet Zara was despite her injured leg. Her people had clearly evolved for stealth. The station's internal comm system crackled again. Attention all personnel. We have guests aboard who are conducting a legitimate search for stolen property. Please provide full cooperation with any requests from the representatives of the Crimson Reaper. Jake felt his jaw clench. Ramirez was already rolling over for the slavers. It probably hadn't taken much, a small payment, maybe some trade agreements, and the promise that they'd be gone quickly. The station chief was practical above all else. They reached the entrance to Jake's destination, a maintenance shaft that led down to the station's lower engineering levels. These areas were rarely visited except during major repairs, and Jake had spent enough time down there to know every hiding spot and alternate route. Down here, he said, opening the shaft access panel. It's going to be dark and cramped. Zara looked down into the shaft and then back at Jake. You know these areas well? I've been working stations like this for 15 years, Jake replied. I know where every pipe goes, every circuit runs, every dead space exists. If there's anywhere on this station the Vexhai won't find you, it's down there. They began their descent, Jake going first to test each step and handholds for Zara's safety. The shaft was indeed cramped, barely wide enough for one person, and it descended for nearly 50 feet before opening into a larger maintenance area. When they emerged, Jake activated a small portable light. They were in the station's secondary power distribution center, a maze of conduits, junction boxes, and access crawlways that stretched for hundreds of meters in every direction. The air was warmer here, heated by the passage of energy through massive cables, and there was a constant low hum from the electrical systems. This way, Jake said, leading Zara through a gap between 2 large transformers. There's a space up ahead that's not on any official blueprints. They navigated through the mechanical maze for several minutes before Jake stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall. However, when he pressed against a specific panel, it swung inward to reveal a small chamber beyond. Found this about 6 months ago, Jake explained as they entered. Looks like it was sealed off during the station's last major renovation. Perfect for storing emergency supplies or hiding from unwanted visitors. The hidden room was about the size of a large closet, with enough space for 2 people to sit comfortably. Jake had already set up some basic amenities, a couple of cushions, emergency rations, and a small air recycling unit. It wasn't luxurious, but it would keep them alive. Zara settled onto one of the cushions with obvious relief. Very clever, Jake Morrison. You think like Survivor. You learn to adapt when you work in places like this, Jake replied, but he was pleased by the compliment. The air is good, and this panel here will let us tap into the station's power grid without showing up on any usage monitors. They sat in relative silence for a few minutes, listening to the distant hums and clicks of the station's machinery. Jake was trying to plan their next move when Zara suddenly stiffened. They are on the station now, she said quietly. I can feel them getting closer. The leader, his name is Kekstar. He is very angry that I escaped. The other two are called Vexin and Morgul. They think this will be easy money. How specific can your abilities get? Jake asked. Can you track their movements? Zara nodded slowly. If I focus, yes. But it is risky. The more I use my gift, the more likely they are to detect me. Right now, the risk might be worth it, Jake said. We need to know where they are and what they're doing. Zara closed her eyes and placed her fingertips against her temples. Jake watched in fascination as her breathing slowed and her expression became distant and focused. After several moments, she began to speak in a whisper. They are in Docking Bay 3. Kekstar is speaking to your station chief. He is frustrated. The chief wants more money than Kekstar expected to pay. They are negotiating. She paused, concentrating harder. The other two are being sent to begin searching the residential areas. They have some kind of scanning device. Jake felt a chill run through him. What kind of scanner? Something that detects non-human biology, Zara replied, her eyes still closed. It can distinguish between species, even through walls and barriers. That changed everything. Jake had assumed they could simply hide in the maintenance areas until the Vexi gave up and left. But if they had bioscanners, it was only a matter of time before they found Zara no matter where she hid. How long before they start scanning down here? He asked. Zara opened her eyes, and Jake saw genuine fear there again. They will search residential areas first, then work outward. Maybe 4 hours, perhaps 5 before they reach these levels. 4 hours to come up with a plan. Jake's mind began racing through possibilities. They could try to steal a ship, but station security would stop them before they cleared the docking bay. They could attempt to contact his friend Marcus, but even if they could reach him, there was no way he could get here in time. They could try to disable the Vexi ship, but that would just trap everyone on the station together. Jake, Zara said softly, interrupting his thoughts. There is something I must tell you. Something that makes this more dangerous than just catching escaped slave. Jake looked at her, noting the way she was avoiding his eyes. What is it? My people, we have different types of telepathic ability. Most are like I told you, translators, diplomats. But some are much more powerful. They can not just read thoughts but influence them, control them. She took a deep breath. My grandmother was such a person. When she died, her abilities passed to me. The implications of what she was saying slowly sank in. You're not just a translator. You're a telepath who can control minds. I never used this ability, Zara said quickly. My grandmother taught me it was wrong, dangerous. But Vexi do not know I choose not to use it. They think they capture weapon, something that will make them very powerful in their business. Jake sat back against the wall, processing this information. No wonder the Vexi were willing to pay Ramirez and spend time searching the station. A telepathic controller would be worth a fortune to slavers and criminals. How powerful are we talking about? He asked. With training and practice? Could control minds of dozens of people at once. Could make them forget things, believe things, do things against their will. Zara's voice was filled with disgust. Is why my people guard this secret so carefully. Such power corrupts. But you could use it to stop the Vexi, Jake pointed out. Could make them forget me, yes. Could make them leave station. Zara shook her head. But then, what? Use power once, becomes easier to use again. Soon I become exactly what they wanted to capture, someone who controls others for own benefit. Jake found himself respecting her even more. Here she was, facing capture and probable death, and she was still worried about maintaining her moral principles. It was exactly the kind of thing a human might do, actually. What if there was a way to use your abilities without crossing that line? He asked. Something that would save you without compromising who you are? Zara looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Jake was quiet for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. It was risky and would require perfect timing, but it might be their only chance. You said you could make them forget things, he said finally. What if, instead of controlling them, we gave them something else to focus on? Something that would make them think they'd found what they were looking for? I do not understand. The Vexhai are looking for you specifically, right? But what if they thought they'd found evidence that you were never on this station at all? What if they believed you had stolen a ship and were already long gone? Zara's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. Create false memories. Make them believe they found proof I escaped already. Exactly. You wouldn't be controlling their actions or making them do anything against their will. You'd just be editing their recollection of what they found during their search. Zara was quiet for a long time, clearly struggling with the ethical implications. Finally, she spoke. It is still manipulation. Still using power over others without their consent. True, Jake admitted. But sometimes you have to choose between a small wrong and a much larger one. Those slavers murdered 47 people, including your parents. How many more will they kill if we let them continue operating? And if they capture me, they will force me to do much worse things than altering few memories, Zara added reluctantly. The question is, can you do it? Can you plant false memories convincing enough to fool them? Zara nodded slowly. Yes. But I would need to get close to them, and I would need something to base the false memories on. Some kind of evidence they could believe they found. Jake smiled for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Leave that to me. I've got an idea. He began explaining his plan to Zara, and, as he talked, he saw hope begin to replace some of the fear in her silver eyes. It wasn't a perfect solution, and there were a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was better than just waiting to be found. The station's comm system crackled again. Attention all personnel. Our guests will be conducting a thorough search of all areas. Please remain in your designated work areas and cooperate fully. Jake checked his chronometer. 3.5 hours until the search reached the lower levels. Are you ready to do this? He asked Zara. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I am ready. But, Jake, if something goes wrong, if they catch us, do not try to protect me. Save yourself. Not happening, Jake replied firmly. We're in this together now. Zara smiled at that, the first real smile he'd seen from her. You are very stubborn human. You have no idea, Jake said with a grin. Now come on. We have some false evidence to create. They left their hiding place and began making their way through the maintenance areas toward the station's computer core. Jake's plan required access to the station's internal sensors and communication logs, and he knew exactly how to get it without triggering any security alerts. As they moved through the mechanical maze, Jake found himself thinking about what they were about to do. He'd never been involved in anything like this before. His life had always been about fixing broken things and staying out of trouble. But, looking at Zara, seeing the courage and determination she showed despite everything she'd been through, he knew he was making the right choice. Some things were more important than keeping a low profile. Some things were worth fighting for. Jake led Zara through a series of increasingly narrow maintenance passages until they reached the station's central computer core. The room housed the main servers and communication arrays that controlled everything from life support to docking procedures. More importantly for their current purposes, it contained the sensor logs that tracked all movement within the station. This is it, Jake whispered as he opened an access panel that led directly into the server room. The beauty of working maintenance for 15 years is that you learn where all the security blind spots are. They slipped into the computer core, a room filled with the soft blue glow of status lights and the constant whisper of cooling fans. Jake moved confidently to a maintenance terminal that was built into one of the server racks. What exactly are we doing here? Zara asked, keeping watch at the door. Creating a trail, Jake explained as his fingers flew over the keyboard. The Vexhai will want to see proof of how you got off the station. So we're going to give them exactly that. Jake's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using his administrative access as a senior maintenance technician, he began creating false entries in the station's sensor logs. According to the data he was fabricating, a small escape pod had launched from one of the station's emergency bays approximately 6 hours ago, well before the Vexhi's arrival. Can you really make them believe they found this information themselves? Jake asked as he worked. Zara nodded, though she still looked troubled by what they were planning. I can plant the memory of discovering these logs during their search. I can make them believe it was Kekstar himself who uncovered the evidence. Perfect. Jake added another layer to the deception, creating a fabricated communication log that showed someone attempting to contact the station from the supposed escape pod. The message was garbled and incomplete, but it contained enough recognizable Etherian phrases to be convincing. As Jake worked, Zara suddenly stiffened. They are moving faster than expected. The two searchers have finished the residential areas and are heading toward the commercial district. Kekstar is still with your station chief, but he is growing impatient. How much time do we have? Jake asked, not looking up from his work. Maybe 2 hours before they reach these levels. Jake cursed under his breath. He had hoped for more time to perfect their fake evidence trail. Still, what he had created should be convincing enough, especially with Zara's telepathic assistance. Okay, the electronic evidence is in place, he said, saving his work and carefully covering his digital tracks. Now we need to create some physical evidence to go with it. They left the computer core and made their way toward the emergency bay that Jake had referenced in his false logs. It was a small chamber located near the station's outer hull, designed to house escape pods for use during catastrophic emergencies. Most importantly, it was far from the areas where the Vexhi were currently searching. When they reached the bay, Jake began examining the pod launch mechanisms. I need to make it look like a pod was actually launched from here. That means triggering some of the launch sequence systems without actually firing a pod. Is that possible? Zara asked. Everything's possible when you know how the systems work, Jake replied with a grin. He opened a maintenance panel and began carefully manipulating the launch control circuits. The trick is to make it look like there was an emergency launch that bypassed normal safety protocols. As Jake worked, Zara kept monitoring the Vexhi through her telepathic abilities. They have found nothing in residential areas. Kekstar is becoming very angry. He suspects your station chief is hiding something. Let him suspect. In about an hour, he's going to think he's the smartest investigator in the galaxy. Jake finished his work on the launch systems and stepped back to survey the results. To anyone examining the bay, it would appear that an escape pod had been launched in an emergency situation. Scorch marks on the launch rails, depleted coolant reservoirs in the launch mechanism, and activated emergency beacons all told the story of a hasty departure. Now comes the dangerous part, Jake said to Zara. We need to get you close enough to plant those false memories, but not so close that they can use their bioscanners to detect you. How close? Zara asked. Telepathic range varies between individuals, Jake said, then caught himself. Sorry, I meant to ask how close you need to be. Within maybe 50 meters for strong, clear memory implantation, Zara replied. But I have never tried to alter memories of multiple people at once. And I have never tried to create such complex false memories. Can you do it? Zara was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I believe so. But if something goes wrong, if they detect what I am doing, then we run, Jake said simply. I know this station better than they do. Even if they catch us, I can probably get you to a safe place. They made their way back toward the upper levels of the station, using maintenance passages and service corridors to avoid detection. Jake had chosen a route that would bring them near the areas where the Vexhi were searching, but not so close as to trigger their bioscanners. As they moved through the passages, Jake found himself thinking about what they were doing. A week ago, the most exciting thing in his life had been fixing a malfunctioning coffee machine in the station's recreation area. Now he was helping an alien fugitive deceive some of the most dangerous slavers in known space. Jake, Zara said softly as they paused at a junction. Why are you doing this? Really? It was the second time she had asked him that question, and Jake found himself considering it more carefully this time. You know, when I was a kid, I always dreamed about being a hero, he said finally. Fighting space pirates, rescuing people, making a difference in the galaxy. Reality turned out to be a lot more mundane. Fixing broken things, keeping life support running, trying to stay out of trouble. But this is not mundane, Zara pointed out. No, it's not. Jake smiled at her. Maybe I'm just tired of being ordinary. Or maybe I just can't stand to see good people suffer when there's something I can do about it. Zara studied his face in the dim light of the maintenance passage. You are not ordinary, Jake Morrison. Ordinary people do not risk everything for strangers. Before Jake could respond, they heard voices echoing through the station's corridors. The Vex-High searchers were getting closer. Time to put our plan into action, Jake whispered. They positioned themselves in a maintenance crawlspace that ran parallel to the main corridor where the Vex-High would pass. Through a small observation port, they could see into the corridor itself. Jake checked his handheld scanner. They were approximately 40 meters from where the slavers would walk by. Close enough, he asked Zara. She nodded, already closing her eyes and beginning to concentrate. I can feel them approaching. The two searchers, Vexin and Morgul. Their minds are unpleasant, full of violence and cruelty. Jake watched through the observation port as two figures came into view. The Vex-High were humanoid but larger than most humans, with grayish skin and sharp, angular features. They wore dark armor and carried advanced scanning equipment. Even from a distance, Jake could sense an aura of menace about them. Now, he whispered to Zara. Plant the memory of finding the emergency bay. Zara's breathing deepened as she focused her telepathic abilities. Jake watched in fascination as a look of intense concentration crossed her face. He could almost feel the psychic energy she was projecting, though he had no telepathic abilities of his own. The effect on the Vex-High was immediate and subtle. The two searchers stopped walking and looked at each other. One of them, Vex-Hin, according to Zara, pointed back the way they had come. We need to check emergency bay 7, Vex-Hin said in a harsh, guttural voice. I have feeling we missed something there. Kexstar will be angry if we waste time checking areas twice, the other replied. Better angry than missing important evidence, Vex_Hin countered. Come. Jake felt a surge of excitement as the two slavers turned around and headed toward the emergency bay where he had planted the physical evidence. The telepathic suggestion was working perfectly. Excellent, he whispered to Zara. Can you follow their progress? Zara nodded, her eyes still closed. They are moving toward the bay. When they find the evidence, I will plant the full memory sequence. They will believe they discovered everything through their own investigation skills. They waited in tense silence for several minutes. Finally, Zara's eyes snapped open. They found the bay. They are examining the launch systems. She closed her eyes again, concentrating even more intensely than before. Now I give them the memories of finding the computer logs, the communication traces, everything. Jake held his breath as Zara worked her telepathic magic. Through the observation port, he could see other station personnel going about their business, unaware of the drama taking place just meters away. It struck him how normal everything looked when in reality they were engaged in a desperate struggle for survival. It is done, Zara said finally, opening her eyes. She looked exhausted but relieved. They believe they have found conclusive proof that I escaped an emergency pod. They are contacting Kexstar now. Sure enough, Jake could hear the crackle of communication equipment from the direction of the emergency bay. One of the Vex-High was speaking rapidly in their native language, presumably reporting their discovery to their leader. What are they saying? Jake asked. Zara listened for a moment, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Vexin is very proud of his investigative skills. He is telling Kexstar that the escape pod launched before their arrival and is probably already outside the system. He is recommending they pursue immediately. And, Kexstar? Angry that I escaped, but pleased that his subordinates found the trail so quickly. He is ordering them to return to their ship immediately. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Their plan was working. The Vex-High believed they had missed their prey but at least had a clear trail to follow. They would leave the station and chase after a phantom escape pod, buying Jake and Zara the time they needed to figure out a real escape plan. But, as they began to make their way back to their hiding place, Zara suddenly grabbed Jake's arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Something is wrong." "What is it?" "Kekstar. He is suspicious. He wants to examine the evidence himself before they leave." Jake felt his heart sink. If the Vex High leader was experienced and intelligent, he might spot the flaws in their fabricated evidence. And, if he did, the search would begin again with renewed intensity. "Can you influence his judgment when he examines the evidence?" Jake asked. Zara shook her head. "He will be looking specifically for deception. His mind will be guarded, suspicious. If I try to manipulate his thoughts while he is in that state, he will detect me immediately. Then, we need to make sure the evidence is absolutely convincing," Jake said grimly. "Even to a suspicious mind." "How?" Jake thought quickly. Their fabricated evidence was good, but it wasn't perfect. An expert investigator might notice inconsistencies in the timing or technical details. "Unless I need to go back to the emergency bay," Jake said suddenly. "That is too dangerous. They will be there. Not to the bay itself. To the computer systems that control it. I can make some adjustments that will make our evidence even more convincing." "What kind of adjustments?" "Right now, the evidence shows that an escape pod was launched. But, what if I could show that it was launched by someone with detailed knowledge of Ethereum technology? Someone who used advanced programming techniques that only your people would know?" Zara's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. "You want to add Ethereum-specific technical signatures to the launch sequence." "Exactly. It would explain how you managed to bypass the normal safety protocols and launch a pod without authorization. It would also give Kekstar proof that it really was you who escaped, not just some random fugitive. But, I do not know enough about your technology to tell you what signatures to add." Jake smiled. "You don't need to. Your people use quantum-based computing systems, right? I can fake quantum processing signatures in the launch logs. Kekstar won't know enough about human technology to realize they're fake, but he'll recognize them as Ethereum." It was a desperate plan, but it might be their only chance to convince the Vex High leader that their false trail was genuine. "I must come with you," Zara said. "If something goes wrong, you will need my help." "Too risky. If they detect you." "They will not detect me if I do not use my abilities," Zara interrupted. "And, you will need me to identify Ethereum technical signatures. I may not understand human technology, but I know my own people's methods." Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her silver eyes. And, she was right, he would need her expertise to make the fake signatures convincing. "All right," he said finally. "But, we do this fast and we stay hidden. At the first sign of trouble, we run." "Agreed." They began making their way back toward the emergency bay, taking an even more circuitous route than before. Jake's mind was racing as he planned exactly what technical modifications he would need to make to sell their deception. As they moved through the maintenance passages, Jake found himself marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few hours. This morning, he had been Jake Morrison, maintenance technician. Tonight, he was Jake Morrison, co-conspirator in one of the most elaborate deceptions he had ever heard of. And, strangely, despite the danger, despite the fear, despite the fact that discovery would probably mean death for both of them, Jake found himself feeling more alive than he had in years. Maybe this was what it felt like to finally be the hero he had always dreamed of being. Jake and Zara reached the service corridor adjacent to Emergency Bay 7 just as Kekstar arrived with his subordinates. Through the maintenance panel's observation window, Jake got his first look at the Vexi leader, and he immediately understood why Zara was so terrified of him. Kekstar was massive, even by Vexi standards, with scars covering his gray skin and cybernetic implants gleaming along his jawline. His eyes held an intelligence that was somehow more frightening than simple brutality would have been. This was not just a thug, this was a predator who had survived by being smarter and more ruthless than his competitors. "Show me," Kekstar growled to his subordinates in heavily accented standard. Jake watched as Vexin and Morgul led their leader through the emergency bay, pointing out the evidence of the pod launch. Kekstar examined everything with the methodical thoroughness of an experienced hunter, checking scorch marks, testing launch mechanisms, even sampling the residual gases with a portable analyzer. "This is not good," Zara whispered. "He is much more careful than I expected. He will spot the flaws in our evidence." "Not if I can help it," Jake replied. He was already connecting his portable terminal to a maintenance access port that controlled the base computer systems. "Tell me about Ethereum quantum signatures. What would the pattern look like in a computer system?" "Our technology uses quantum entanglement for processing," Zara explained quietly. "When we interface with non-Ethereum systems, there are usually residual quantum fluctuations in the data streams. Very specific patterns based on our neural frequencies." "Can you describe the pattern?" Zara closed her eyes, concentrating. "Harmonic resonance in prime number sequences. Usually based on the Fibonacci sequence but with quantum variations. The numbers would be 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, but with quantum probability shifts at each level." Jake's fingers flew over his terminal as he accessed the bay's launch control logs. He began inserting the quantum signature patterns Zara had described, backdating them to match the supposed time of the pod launch. To anyone examining the logs, it would appear that someone with Ethereum technology had interfaced directly with the launch systems. As he worked, Jake kept one eye on Kekstar through the observation window. The Vex High leader was now examining the computer logs that his subordinates had discovered, and Jake could see skepticism in his expression. "He suspects something," Zara warned. "He has found inconsistencies in the timing data." "Almost done," Jake muttered, making final adjustments to the quantum signatures. "There. Now the logs show that whoever launched the pod had to bypass 3 different security protocols using Ethereum quantum computing methods." They watched as Kekstar's expression changed. He was looking at his scanner with what Jake hoped was recognition rather than suspicion. "Yes," Zara breathed. "He recognizes the quantum signatures. He has seen them before when capturing other Ethereans." But, just as Jake began to feel hopeful, Kekstar suddenly stopped and tilted his head, as if listening to something. The Vex High leader pulled out a more advanced scanner and began slowly sweeping it around the emergency bay. "Bioscanner," Jake realized with growing horror. "He's doing a detailed scan of the area. Will it detect me through these walls?" Zara asked urgently. "I don't know. Depends on how sensitive it is and how much metal is between us and him." They watched in tense silence as Kekstar methodically scanned the emergency bay and surrounding areas. The scanner in his hands was clearly more advanced than the devices his subordinates had been using. Jake could see readings fluctuating on its display as it detected various life forms throughout the station. Then, Kekstar paused, looking directly at the wall behind which Jake and Zara were hiding. "He has detected something," Zara whispered. "Not me specifically, but he knows there is someone very close." Jake's mind raced through their options. They could try to run, but the maintenance corridor they were in was a dead end. The only way out was back the way they had come, and that would take them directly past Kekstar's position. They could try to hide deeper in the maintenance systems, but if the Vex High had detected them, it was only a matter of time before they were found. "Can you do something to confuse the scanner?" Jake asked desperately. "Not without using my abilities. And if I use them now, he will know exactly where I am." Jake looked around the cramped maintenance space, searching for anything that might help them. His eyes fell on a power junction box that controlled the emergency bay's lighting systems. A desperate idea began to form. "When I say so, be ready to run," he told Zara. "Back the way we came, as fast as you can." "What are you going to do?" "Something incredibly stupid." Jake began rapidly disconnecting power cables from the junction box. "I'm going to cause a power surge that will temporarily disable all the electronics in this section, including his scanner. It'll only give us a few seconds, but it might be enough." "Jake, no. That will confirm that someone is here. They will search even more thoroughly." "They're going to search anyway," Jake pointed out. "At least this way we have a chance." Through the observation window, they could see Kekstar moving closer to their hiding spot, his scanner readings getting stronger. In another minute, he would pinpoint their exact location. "Ready?" Jake asked, his hand hovering over the final power connection. Zara nodded, preparing herself to run despite her injured leg. Jake yanked the power cable. Instantly, every light in the emergency bay went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but, for that crucial moment, all the electronic systems in the area shut down completely. In the darkness, Jake heard Kekstar roar with anger as his scanner died. "Run!" Jake hissed. He and Zara burst out of the maintenance corridor and sprinted back the way they had come. Jake could hear shouts behind them as the Vexai realized what had happened, but the emergency lighting was still cycling back online and it would take precious seconds for their equipment to reboot. They ran through the maintenance passages as fast as Zara's injured leg would allow. Jake could hear pursuit behind them, heavy footsteps and harsh voices echoing through the corridors. The Vexai were following, but, in the maze of maintenance tunnels, Jake had the advantage of superior knowledge. "This way," he gasped, pulling Zara down a side passage that led toward the station's industrial fabrication areas. "We can lose them in the machine shops." They emerged into a large chamber filled with automated manufacturing equipment, 3D printers, metal fabricators, and assembly robots that operated around the clock producing spare parts for the station. The noise was tremendous, and the maze of machinery provided excellent cover. Jake led Zara between the massive machines, using his knowledge of their operating cycles to avoid the dangerous automated systems. Behind them, they could hear Kekstar and his subordinates entering the fabrication area, but the noise and visual chaos of the working machinery would make it difficult to track them. "Over here," Jake whispered, guiding Zara to a maintenance alcove between two large fabrication units. "We can hide here while they search." They crouched in the alcove, trying to control their breathing as the sounds of the search drew closer. Jake could hear the Vexai moving through the fabrication area, clearly frustrated by the industrial environment that interfered with their scanners. "They have lost us for now," Zara said quietly. "But Kekstar is very angry. He knows someone helped me create the false evidence. Does he still believe I escaped in the pod?" Zara concentrated for a moment. "He is uncertain. The quantum signatures convinced him that an Etherian was involved, but the power surge made him suspicious that someone is still here helping me. So we're back where we started." "No," Zara said suddenly. "We are in worse position. Before, they thought they were chasing escaped slave. Now they know someone on this station is actively working against them. They will not leave until they find us." Jake slumped against the wall of the maintenance alcove. Their elaborate deception had partially worked. They had convinced Kekstar that Zara had tried to escape, but his suspicions about ongoing help meant they were now facing a manhunt instead of just a search. "I'm sorry," he said to Zara. "I made things worse." "No," Zara replied firmly. "You tried to save me. That is more than anyone else would have done." As if to emphasize her point, the station's comm system crackled to life with an announcement from Chief Ramirez. "Attention all personnel. We are conducting a comprehensive security sweep of all areas. Anyone found harboring unauthorized individuals will face immediate termination and criminal charges. Report any suspicious activity to station security immediately." "Your chief has chosen sides," Zara observed sadly. Jake felt anger building in his chest. Ramirez was not just allowing the Vexai to hunt on his station, he was actively helping them. The promise of easy money had overcome any moral qualms the station chief might have had. "Can you still sense their movements?" Jake asked. Zara nodded. "They have split up. Kekstar is returning to the emergency bay to examine the evidence again. The other two are searching the fabrication areas, but they are moving away from us." "Good. That gives us some time to figure out our next move." "What next move?" "We cannot hide forever, and we cannot leave the station." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking through their impossibly limited options. Then, an idea occurred to him, dangerous and desperate, but possibly their only chance. "Actually, there might be a way to leave the station," he said slowly. "But you're not going to like it. Tell me." The mining operation down on the planet. They send automated cargo runs up to the station every few hours to deliver processed ore. The cargo pods are large enough to hide in, and they're not usually scanned because they're considered internal transport. Zara stared at him. You want us to hide in a cargo container and hope no one discovers us? It's better than that. The next cargo run isn't scheduled for another 6 hours, which gives us time to prepare. And I know where the cargo pods go after they dock, to a holding area that's rarely monitored. And then, what? We hide in cargo pod forever? No, then, we steal a ship. Jake's plan was crystallizing as he spoke. The holding area is right next to the small craft docking bay. If we can get there undetected, we can take one of the maintenance shuttles. They're fast, small, and, most importantly, they're not usually tracked very carefully. You want to steal spaceship from your own station? I want to save your life, Jake replied. And, frankly, after what Ramirez has done tonight, I don't feel much loyalty to this place anymore. Zara studied his face in the dim light of the fabrication area. This plan, it has many ways to fail. Yes, it does. But, it also has a chance of success, which is more than we can say about hiding indefinitely. And, if we are caught? Jake met her silver eyes steadily. Then, we're caught. But, at least we'll have tried. Zara was silent for a long moment, and Jake could almost see her weighing their options. Finally, she nodded. Very well, Jake Morrison. I will trust your plan. But, first, we must survive the next 6 hours without being found. Leave that to me, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. I know this station like the back of my hand. If anyone can keep us hidden for 6 hours, it's me. As if summoned by his words, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching their hiding spot. Jake and Zara pressed themselves deeper into the maintenance alcove as the footsteps passed by their position. They are close, Zara whispered. Very close. Jake nodded grimly. 6 hours had never seemed like such a long time. But, as he looked at Zara, seeing the trust and determination in her alien features, Jake felt his resolve strengthen. She was depending on him, and he would not let her down. No matter what it took, he was going to get her off this station safely. The hunt was far from over, but Jake Morrison was beginning to understand something about himself that he had never known before. When pushed to his limits, when everything was on the line, he was capable of much more than he had ever imagined. The Vexhai were about to learn what happened when you cornered a human who had nothing left to lose. The next 5 hours passed like a nightmare game of hide and seek played with lethal stakes. Jake led Zara through every hidden passage, forgotten storage room, and maintenance crawlway he had discovered during his 15 years on the station. They moved like ghosts through the mechanical arteries of Outpost Sigma 7, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. The Vexhai had proven to be methodical and relentless hunters. They had divided the station into sections and were searching each area with painstaking thoroughness. Jake could hear them moving through the passages, their bioscanners sweeping constantly for any trace of non-human life. They are getting frustrated, Zara whispered as they crouched in a ventilation shaft high above the station's main promenade. Kekstar expected to find me hours ago. Good, Jake replied quietly. Frustrated people make mistakes. Below them, they could see station personnel going about their business under the watchful eyes of armed security guards. Ramirez had essentially placed the station under martial law, using the excuse of the search to control every movement of his crew. Jake felt disgusted watching his former colleagues being treated like potential criminals. The cargo run should arrive in 43 minutes, Jake said, checking his chronometer. Are you ready for this? Zara shifted position slightly, wincing as her injured leg cramped. I am ready. But, Jake, if something happens to me. Nothing is going to happen to you, Jake interrupted firmly. If something happens, Zara continued, promise me you will not blame yourself. You have done more for me than anyone could ask. Jake looked at her in the dim light of the ventilation shaft. Over the past hours, he had watched her endure pain, fear, and exhaustion without complaint. She had followed his lead through dangerous passages and impossible situations, trusting him completely even when his plans seemed hopeless. Promise me something in return, he said. When we get out of this, when you're safe, don't let what happened here change who you are. Don't let them turn you into someone who uses power over others." Zara smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in hours. "I promise. Though I think perhaps I have learned something from watching humans. Sometimes the right action is worth any risk." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of movement in the passage below. Two of Ramirez's security guards were conducting another sweep of the area. Jake and Zara pressed themselves flat against the ventilation shaft's walls and waited motionlessly until the guards moved on. "Time to move," Jake whispered when the coast was clear. "The cargo arrival area is on the other side of the station." They began the most dangerous part of their journey, crossing from the upper maintenance levels to the lower cargo handling areas. It required traveling through sections of the station that were more heavily monitored, with fewer places to hide if they were discovered. Jake led them through a route that took advantage of the station's shift change schedules. He had memorized the patterns of the security sweeps and knew exactly when and where the gaps in coverage would occur. It was like solving a three-dimensional puzzle where the wrong answer meant death. They reached the cargo arrival area just as Jake's chronometer showed 20 minutes until the scheduled delivery. The area was a large chamber with automated handling equipment designed to process incoming cargo pods from the planetary mining operation. Perfect timing, Jake breathed as he checked the arrival schedule on a nearby terminal. Pod designation MC-447 is on approach. Estimated arrival in 18 minutes. How do we get inside the pod without being seen? Zara asked. Jake pointed to a maintenance access tunnel that ran underneath the cargo handling platform. We go in from below. The pods have standard maintenance hatches for emergency access. Once we're inside, we just have to hope no one decides to inspect this particular shipment. They made their way to the access tunnel and positioned themselves directly beneath where the cargo pod would dock. Jake had brought cutting tools from his maintenance kit, just in case they needed to force their way into the pod. The wait was excruciating. Every sound made them tense, every footstep in the corridors above sent adrenaline coursing through their systems. Jake found himself thinking about what they were about to attempt. Hiding in a cargo pod was dangerous enough, but stealing a shuttle afterward would make them fugitives from their own people as well as the Vexi. "Jake," Zara said softly, "there is something I must tell you before we do this." "What is it?" "Earlier, when I used my abilities to plant false memories in the Vexi minds, I felt something. Darkness. Using the power, even for good reasons, it felt pleasant in a way that frightened me." Jake understood what she was trying to say. "You're worried that once you start using your abilities, it will get easier to use them again." "Yes. My grandmother warned me about this. She said the power always seeks to be used, and each time becomes easier than the last." "But you fought against it. This time. But what about next time? What about when we are in that shuttle and there are security forces trying to stop us? It would be so easy to simply make them forget they saw us, or convince them to let us pass." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her dilemma. Then, he had an idea. "What if you didn't have to make that choice alone?" he asked. "What do you mean? What if you had someone whose job it was to remind you who you are? Someone who could help you find alternatives to using your abilities, even in desperate situations?" Zara looked at him with surprise. "You would do that? You would stay with me and help me resist the temptation of power?" "I think we make a pretty good team," Jake said with a smile. "Besides, where else am I going to go after tonight? I'm probably going to be wanted for theft, harboring fugitives, and sabotage." Before Zara could respond, they heard the rumble of approaching engines. The cargo pod was arriving. "Showtime," Jake said, positioning himself beneath the docking hatch with his cutting tools ready. The pod settled into place with a heavy thunk, and Jake immediately went to work on the maintenance hatch. The cutting beam made quick work of the locking mechanism, and within minutes they had access to the pod's interior. The cargo compartment was filled with processed ore in sealed containers, leaving just enough space for two people to hide among the shipping crates. It would be cramped and uncomfortable, but it was their ticket off the station. They squeezed into the pod just as the automated handling systems began unloading the cargo. For the next 20 minutes, they were jostled and shaken as the pod was moved through the station's cargo processing systems. Finally, the movement stopped, and they heard the sounds of the pod being placed in the holding area. "Wait 5 minutes," Jake whispered. "Let the automated systems finish their cycle." They waited in the darkness of the cargo pod, listening to the distant sounds of machinery and station operations. Finally, Jake judged it safe to emerge. The holding area was exactly as he remembered, a large chamber lined with cargo pods and shipping containers, with minimal lighting and no obvious security presence. More importantly, the small craft docking bay was just through a single door at the far end of the chamber. "Stay close," Jake whispered as they made their way between the stacked cargo containers. Almost there. They reached the door to the docking bay, and Jake carefully checked for security sensors. Finding none, he opened the door and peered inside. The small craft bay contained a half-dozen maintenance shuttles and personal vessels used by station personnel for various duties. Jake immediately spotted his target, a fast courier shuttle that was normally used for emergency supply runs to the mining operation. "That one," he said, pointing to the shuttle. "It's fueled, provisioned, and fast enough to outrun anything the Vexhai are flying." As they approached the shuttle, Jake began the pre-flight sequence on his handheld terminal. His maintenance access code still worked, allowing him to override the normal authorization requirements. "Jake," Zara said suddenly, grabbing his arm. "Something is wrong." "What?" "I can sense Kekstar. He is very close. And he is pleased about something." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "A trap?" Before Zara could answer, the lights in the docking bay suddenly blazed to full brightness. Emergency barriers slammed down over the exits, and Jake heard the distinctive whine of charging energy weapons. "Very good, human," Kekstar's voice echoed through the bay from hidden speakers. "You have led us exactly where we wanted you to go." Jake spun around to see Kekstar and his subordinates emerging from concealment behind other shuttles. The Vexhai leader was smiling, displaying teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. "Did you really think we had not discovered your little hiding places?" Kekstar continued. "We have been watching you for the last hour, waiting to see what escape plan you would attempt." Jake pulled Zara behind him, though he knew it was a futile gesture. They were trapped in the open with nowhere to run. "The girl comes with us now," Kekstar said, raising his weapon. "You, human, are no longer needed." That was when Zara stepped out from behind Jake. "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly different, older, more commanding. "Before you kill him, there is something you should know." "The only thing I need to know is that you are worth a fortune to the right buyers," Kekstar replied. "I am worth much more than you realize," Zara said, and Jake heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. "I am not just a telepath. I am a controller." Kekstar's eyes widened slightly. "Impossible. Controllers are myths." "Are they?" Zara asked, and, suddenly, her silver eyes began to glow with an inner light. "Would you like me to prove it?" Jake felt psychic energy radiating from Zara like heat from a star. It was power on a scale he had never imagined, and he could see the effect it was having on the Vexhai. Their weapons wavered as uncertainty crept into their minds. "Do not try your tricks on us," Kekstar said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We have mental shields." "Against telepaths, perhaps," Zara replied. "But not against this." The psychic pressure in the bay suddenly intensified, and Jake watched in amazement as the three Vexhai began to struggle against some invisible force. Their weapons slowly lowered as their arms stopped obeying their conscious commands. "You see," Zara continued, her voice echoing with power, "I can do much more than read thoughts. I can rewrite them entirely. I can make you believe anything I choose. I can make you forget who you are, or remember things that never happened." Kekstar was fighting against the mental intrusion with impressive willpower, but Jake could see that he was losing. Sweat beaded on the Vexhai leader's gray skin as he struggled to maintain control of his own mind. "Stop," Kekstar gasped. "What do you want?" "I want you to leave," Zara said simply. "I want you to return to your ship and forget you ever came to this station. I want you to believe that your sensors were wrong, that there was never an Etherian here at all." And if we refuse? Zara's smile was terrible to behold. Then, I will take control of your minds completely. I will make you my slaves, just as you plan to make me yours. I will force you to turn your weapons on each other, and, then, I will make the survivor live with the memory of what he was forced to do. Jake stared at Zara in shock. This was not the gentle, principled person he had been helping. This was something else entirely, something cold and powerful and terrifying. But, then, he noticed something that the Vexai could not see. Despite the display of overwhelming power, despite the commanding voice and glowing eyes, Zara's hands were shaking. She was terrified of what she was doing, terrified of the power she was using, but she was doing it anyway to save his life. Choose quickly, Zara continued. My patience grows thin. Kekstar looked at his subordinates, both of whom were clearly struggling against the mental pressure. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he nodded. We will leave, he said through gritted teeth. But, this is not over, Controller. We will find other ways to take you. You will try, Zara agreed. But, you will not succeed. And, if you are wise, you will spread the word to others of your kind. The Etherians are under my protection now. The psychic pressure in the bay suddenly vanished, and the three Vexai staggered as control of their bodies returned to them. For a moment, Jake thought they might attack anyway, but Kekstar was too intelligent to underestimate an opponent who had just demonstrated such overwhelming power. This is not finished, Kekstar repeated, but he was already backing toward the exit. For you, it is, Zara replied coldly. The three Vexai retreated, and Jake heard the emergency barriers cycling open to let them pass. Within minutes, the stations.